Photographic Composition, Lecture 5, The Digital Darkroom, Part 2. Dwayne Michaels has been engaged in creating serial imagery and multiple imagery, such as we see here. In this instance, he had a session with René Magritte, the Belgian surrealist, in which he exposed this interior scene first without Magritte, and then with Magritte sitting in the foreground, and then also standing off to the side and viewing the scene as we see in a reflection in the mirror on the left. In this instance, the scene was photographed with Magritte facing the camera and then with his back to the camera. It's entirely conceivable, though, that Magritte and this scene were never in the same place at the same time, and this might in fact be a combination of 3 images as opposed to just 2. He has, in more recent years, added color. What he's primarily worked in is black and white. He's also painted on images. Whatever he needs to express himself is fair game as far as he's concerned. Edmund Teske was a Los Angeles photographer who photographed a lot of people, created a lot of allegorical scenes, mostly manipulated his images in a variety of ways. In this case, this is a photograph of Jim Morrison of the Doors, and it has been overlaid with several other images. It looks like perhaps a flower or 2, and perhaps a landscape. It's not clear, and clarity is not the intention here. This gives you a clearer idea of some of the manipulation that Teske would engage in. The image on the left is clearly unmanipulated. On the right, however, is one that has been solarized. That's where the process in which a developing print is exposed to direct light briefly. And in that process, this discoloration occurs, and lights often turn to darks. Darks can turn to light. And the results are difficult to control, and will never be exactly the same more than once. Jerry Uelsmann creates incredibly complex multiple images. In this case, he's taken the negative of a tree and flipped it horizontally so that it's completely symmetrical. Then combined that with a shot of the seashore, and into that included or dropped in the image of the women in silhouette. This is quite typical of Uelsmann's work, in which he has taken a structure and placed it in such a way that it looks like it's growing out of the root structure of a tree. This image probably involved 3 or 4 images to begin with. It's a very painstaking process, and one that is very difficult to replicate over and over again. Each print tends to be a little bit different than the one that came before it. And I should also point out that this requires thinking ahead and pre-visualizing, if you will, what he's going to be doing with the images when he gets into the darkroom. Robert Heineken was the photographer who started the photography department at UCLA back in the late 1950s, and was also a great photographer in his own right. He wasn't so much interested in his own imagery as he was with manipulating other imagery. In this case, a page from a magazine, which was then transferred or rephotographed and placed in a print. the overlap of information is part of what he was after. It's random, but also he would spend a lot of time editing what he found. Here we have, and in this case, we also have text. Are you ready or are you real? Leaving the interpretation up to the viewer. This is another example in color of Heineken's process, where he's done the same thing. This is using a transfer process where the ink from the original magazine page is transferred to plain paper. Darrell Curran uses multiple imagery. In this case, it appears to be a couple of cyanotype images and a photograph of a hot dog and something else in the background. Not sure what that is. This is again using a transfer process where the original inks are transferred to another medium, in this case a paper. More currently, Curran has been experimenting with compositions that he would create on a scanner, and there's no actual camera involved. He would create a tableau and then cover it with either paper or fabric or something else, and just scan the scene. As a result, we end up with these very kind of delicate, beautifully rendered images. Patrick Nagatani creates images with a great number of images in order to get this one composite, and with the intention of juxtaposing various kinds of imagery and ideas. This is a bit more straightforward, but also a manipulated image by Nagatani. James Fee used processes that were relatively arcane and would often create results like this, in which the image is not terribly clear. Clarity is not the objective. These are as if they were found remnants without any kind of context. It's clear that it's the Statue of Liberty, but that's about all that's clear about it. His intention, I think, here is to let the audience in on how he was feeling at the time that he made the image. Whatever the viewer brings to it is also completely valid, but it has this very personal feel to it. This is from a series that Fee did on the relates to his father, who had fought in the Second World War, was in the Navy, and Fee had actually gone to the location where his father had at one time been involved in a battle, and brought back imagery that expressed his impressions of the place. Mark Klett is known for having taken 19th century photographs and gone back to those locations and rephotographed them. He has been collecting this imagery, both his own and historical images, and combining them in more and more complex compositions, such as the one that you see here. And this is more of the same kind of work that Klett has been engaged in. Again, some of the images are his, and some of them are by other photographers, and some of them 100, 150 or more years previous to his work. This image by Andreas Gursky would appear to be a relatively straightforward image, but in fact it's a composite. It's made from, I believe, 4 or 5 images, which were then stitched together in Photoshop. And if you look really carefully, you're going to need to find an image, a print that's much more detailed than this is, but you can actually see that the receding point changes as you go from one to the next, but the overall impression is of a single scene that was shot all at once. A twist on that same idea was employed to create this, in which multiple exposures were made of the same scene and then combined. Various sections of those various exposures were combined to create a scene in which it looks like there's far more activity than was actually going on at the time. This image by Gursky looks relatively straightforward, but in fact, there was either a factory or a power plant very prominent in this scene, and he didn't feel that it suited his vision, so he removed it. That kind of work generally takes time and is part of the reason that Gursky does not create a lot of images each year. David Lachapelle began as a celebrity photographer and more recently has been highly manipulating his images, and to the point of scenes like this, which look almost like cartoons. They're so complex, but also so unlifelike, so surreal, that they don't really look like photographs anymore. This is actually much closer to straight photography, at least as far as Lachapelle is concerned, and obviously a scene that probably did not actually occur.